Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Friendly Friday. Today I have with me Ellie. We're going to be talking about a lot of really cool things. How you doing today, Ellie?
I'm doing all right. It's a nice, cool day over here in Texas.
Good. I know cool days are always appreciated in Texas. The climate's pretty
Yeah,
harsh.
I'm right above Houston, so it's all like humid
Oof.
all the time, so it's really nice when you have a little bit of a chilly day.
Right, yeah. No, I grew up in Kentucky, so I'm all too familiar with the humidity and especially when it gets cold, it gets that like bone so bad.
Yeah, I spent a nice summer in Kentucky looking at the law schools at the University of Kentucky, so I know a little bit about the summer temperatures there. I don't know about the rest of the weather there, but it's broadly similar to the rest of the South, just
Uh,
complete soup.
Yeah, just awful. Well, thank you for coming on and talking with us today. If you want to go ahead and jump into it, tell us a little bit about your experience as a trans person.
Right. Okay. So, I guess my experience as a trans person is really connected to like the broader narrative of what my life is. So, I am descendant of two refugees, the Vietnam War. So, both of them came over in the 70s and 80s. My father was settled into North Carolina, and my mother was settled into Port Chaffee, Arkansas. Uh, they didn't speak much English when they came. They were teenagers, and then they had to work their way up. And they had, my mother at least, had very traditional Catholic values, which were basically the foundation of like her life, right? And so, like growing up, it's a very conservative outlook per se to grow up in the Catholic Church. I went to Sunday school every weekend, Vietnamese Sunday school. Uh, English is actually my second language. I learned Vietnamese first in Vietnamese speaking household. So for the longest time as a kid, I had this Vietnamese accent. And so I guess the early part of my life was defined by like constantly going to the Catholic Church, uh going to Our Lady of Lavang churches, and it was generally a pretty socially conservative atmosphere. Um, and I've lived a lot of places. When I was younger, I lived in Mexico, which is now where certain parts of my family reside. I live partly in Southeast Asia, in which I helped co-found an organization that helped out blind children there and helped out schools for the blind. And then I was adopted at 11 to a pretty conservative family, part of my family. So at 11, I was adopted by my maternal aunt, and they were even more Catholic than my mother. So it was a very socially conservative outlook that I grew up in, but also a very diverse outlook. I did grow up in a community when I was very much younger in that was mostly immigrants, mostly Vietnamese immigrants, and then I moved to Texas where I lived in the mostly kind of mixed middle class neighborhood. Uh, some people without college educations, a lot of ethnic diversity, but also very socially conservative given the whole Texas. And so, in terms of what it was like to be trans, it was both accepted to be a little different, but also there was a limit to that difference. So you could be in this very ethnically diverse neighborhood, but still a lot of people there you went to church with had relatively socially conservative values. And so I was I had difficulty growing up and being trans. Um, it I did not have the best relationship with my adoptive family, and that led to certain difficulties. And um, some of it I do get because the Catholic faith that they had really was like prime foundation of their social life coming to this country where they didn't speak the language, where they didn't have jobs, where they had to work multiple part-time jobs, where my family had stuffed 11, 12 people into a one-room house in Biloxi, Mississippi. So it's very easy to see how this kind of uh, conservative religious mindset can really take root in these communities, but it can also be a little difficult if you're different.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, I totally empathize with that. I've had growing up, my parents were deeply religious as well, and weren't really accepting of me that much when I came out as gay. So, yeah, I can empathize to an extent, but yeah, I can't imagine how much it must have hurt to have that kind of like conflict within yourself, the way you were raised and the way that you were feeling your identity was developing.
Yes. So I had known from a decently long time what trans identities were. Being in Southeast Asia, you make a trip down to Thailand. There is some level of gender diversity if you go towards some places. In Vietnam, when I was living there was more of an acceptance of gay identities. There were some celebrities who were coming out as gay and lesbian at the time. And in general, I think the attitude of certain members of my family is that it doesn't matter. And for others, it was very much the Catholic line of, uh, read the Bible.
Yeah.
And so that kind of led to a lot of difficulties um, with my family, some of which I did not handle as well as I could have, but I was young and impulsive. So yeah, I was trying to get out, so I just wanted to leave more than anything. So at the age of 14, I applied to the Texas Academy of Math and Science, which is an early college program. At the age of 15, I was accepted into a college on the full ride, but my family forced me to turn that one down. And then a year later, um, I had continued to have difficulty with my family. I had continued to express a desire to leave. I spent some time away from my home. Uh, didn't quite run away, but didn't quite want to stay. And so
Hmm.
at the age of 15, I just declared I was going to withdraw from high school and apply to college again. And so at the age of 16, I started attending Oberlin College. So uh, it was definitely like an urge within myself just to leave that environment so that way I could get into a place where I could be uh, a little more myself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's important to have that place, that safe place where you can be yourself, and it's important to make sure that you feel that about the place you call home as well. So, I'm glad that things are looking like you have a place now where you can kind of be more yourself. So that's good. I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, it's really been nice. So Oberlin College was a place where it's totally okay to be queer,
Hmm.
totally accepted. And so that was a learning point in my life about how to be queer, how to be trans. And I did enjoy the time I had there. Um, and I was able to more express my femininity, express my gender expression, just be myself.
Hmm.
And with time and with distance, members of my family who were extremely socially conservative were more willing to, start to rebuild those bridges that had been broken from a difficult childhood, from me wanting to leave as early as possible, from me not having contact with them. And so now I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but I am going to say that uh, it does get better, and I am redeveloping relationships that I thought would not have continued when I had first left for college.
Right. Well, that's good. I'm glad that you're redeveloping your relationships with your family too. That's important as well. It's all too often that those relationships get lost, and you end up having to cut those people off, and there's no way to repair it. And sometimes in the future you can, but sometimes you can't. So it's good to see that that's working out for you as well.
Yeah. Um, that's not the case across the board, but
Right.
it's the case in a lot more uh, people than I would have expected,
Hmm.
and I appreciate that. I I think about like all those ads that they had for like queer kids, like it gets better. It does
Hmm.
get better. It gets different, is what it gets. It
Yeah.
life continues to have challenges, but it you develop the skills, you develop the friendships, you develop the mechanisms, you develop the communities
Hmm.
that allow you to move forward in life. And I'm really happy that I've been able to meet and I've been able to interact with queer people who have experienced similar things as me, who can relate to these things, and who together we can create kind of these support mechanisms so that way it can get better.
Absolutely. Um, if you wouldn't mind, let me ask you, how did you come about the realization that you were trans?
Well, there was never really a moment per se. There was a period of my life where I didn't think about gender. And then uh, I moved off to Texas, and um, there was a distinction of what I could and couldn't do based upon my gender expression, my gender identity, and I never felt comfortable with my assigned gender at birth. So I said, you know what, I'm trans. Get a number of my friends, even before I was like publicly out, would just mix pronouns for me. I never went by my birth name, so I mean, it was always very interesting going through school and signing everything in my preferred name, and
Yeah.
then like having to like go and figure out who the heck had written these papers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I could see how that might be causing a little bit of conflict for you, but I'm glad to hear that you had a supportive network of friends. That's really important, especially for people just coming out as trans.
Yeah, it was very nice to have people who were relatively informed about the subject. And I mean, you can't expect everyone to be perfect, and there people certainly made their mistakes, and I certainly made my mistakes with other people. I won't pretend that I was perfect to every person at that time, but it you take your allies where you can get them.
Right. Yeah. No, I understand that. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to add about your experience being trans?
Uh, you know, it used to be this big thing, right? To be transgender in my life. Like
Hmm.
it was something that I had fought for and struggled for and left home for, right? And today it feels so minimal to my life that it's just another part of who I am. You know, a child of refugees, a Vietnamese American, transgender woman. I mean, a lot of those are relatively things that are unique about me. But in terms of whether I feel my transgender status every day, whether I think about it every day, it really is just another part of me. It's like as minimal to me sometimes as the color of the shirt I'm wearing. I genuinely don't think about gender that much.
Hmm.
And it's a very interesting dynamic to go from like, oh, I need to go somewhere where I can be myself to now that I'm myself, I don't think about myself anymore. I'm just living life.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I think that would be normalized for people who have been satisfied in their transition so far. Well, I guess satisfied is not the word, but set.
And maybe,
Like when it becomes habitual, like I mean, at the point, like it turns into like a routine almost, like going and taking my estrogen. It's not like a big thing anymore. It's not like something that I celebrated like I did the first couple times. It's just something that I do, um, and I think yeah, I guess the novelty um, wears off pretty quick for people, but um, you know, I think it's also like a part of the experience. That's the whole thing. Is that like I think a lot of it is a lot of the celebration and the importance of it right now is because that there's so much stigma on the other side, that there's so much opposition on the other side. I think that's why we see like an overabundance of celebration to compensate for that. Um, but I think it's awesome. Either way, all trans experiences are valid, and I like hearing from everybody. So I think it would be great we get to a point where it's just like that for everybody. It's just another part of being alive. It's just another part of who you are. That would be awesome.
yeah, I am a little privileged to be able to say this, to have created the situation for myself where it is routine, right? There are people who can live their entire lives in transition without it becoming routine, whether it's because of the household they live in or the country they live in or the situation that they find themselves in. And I am so very lucky that it is a routine to me. But we also do have to recognize that, my experiences are not everyone's experiences. But I would like it if people could come to the situation that I found myself. Now, I'm not in a perfect situation. There are things that change, but it's nice.
Hmm.
It's nice to be this person. But what we do need to recognize is that there are a broad range of issues in society that not only with trans identities, but especially with trans identities, that you definitely do need more of public attention, public support, and hopefully public attention and public support can become uh, ingrained in every single person. Um, you know, things change over time. The novelty of having a gay friend, for example,
Hmm.
is no longer there
Yeah.
sometimes. For some people, it's just a thing. And so there's a lot of ways to make acceptance, integration, various ways of living within the society happen. There's a lot of debates about it. You can definitely hear very many in the activists and the academic literature about whether we should pursue assimilationism or whether we should celebrate our differences. I'm not making any argument on that. I'm just saying that I hope that people can find the situations personally, socially, and in the broader public that best fit their identities and best fit their comfort level relating to their identities.
Yeah, I think both are valid. If you want to fit into the role and be an assimilationist, yeah, that's valid. I think if you want to be a reformist and go outside the box, I think that's valid as well. I think and I spoke to someone else about this as well, but it's essentially that the the spectrum of the binary that we have that we work with, that framework that society sees it through right now, is just too detrimental. When you open up that framework a little bit and you open up the binary to include more than just man or woman, you see a lot of that kind of fall away. So maybe with the years we'll see more education and a better understanding, and more acceptance of not just non-binary people, but xenogenders and neopronouns and stuff like that as well.
Yeah. The thing that I think everyone always has to keep in mind is that we all have different orientations to this world. We all have different ways of experiencing this world. And and everything we may fight for may be routine, it may be even regressive many years from now. We don't know. We don't know how society is going to turn out. We're not sure how people will choose to identify, how different technological and social developments are going to change the ways that we interact with each other and ourselves. So part of what it means to live in a society is to accept that it's always changing, accept that we're always changing, and accept that, the labels and the identities that we use right now aren't necessarily going to be the ones that we're going to use forever, and aren't necessarily going to be the ones that society uses forever. I guess I just think about it sometimes, like when my mother first came to this country, being a Vietnamese American was absolutely unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was isolated to these pockets of refugees. And nowadays, you, there are Vietnamese Americans who live everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The Midwest, the South, the West, the Northeast. You know, societies change, and the ways that we can be in society change. Um, if you had told my mother when she was born that she would move to America, she would become an American, and then she would have an American daughter, an American trans daughter. She would have never believed you, right? She wouldn't have even had the words to express those when she was growing up. And we don't have those words to express how the future is going to turn out. But we can just try our best to make this place a comfortable place for us, our friends, and our societies, and our communities, and really make it that better world. We have to work towards it. It's not given to us. We have to continually fight for it. We have to continually, consciously, actively work for it. And the better world will come. And a different world will come. Maybe it won't be better. I'm hoping that it will be.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be because of the work, the sacrifices, and the difficulties in which people find themselves today.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We are absolutely laying the groundwork for the future generations, especially when it comes to transgender and queer folks going into the new generations. I think a lot of the discourse that's happening today is going to set the tone for what happens with them. And so I'm very hopeful because I'm seeing of the newer generations as they come out is pretty promising, really progressive. So I'm very hopeful that we've got a lot of acceptance coming up here for us in the next coming generations. But it will all, of course, depend on the work we do here today.
Yeah. So I'll admit, this is my first time being interviewed for a podcast. Normally, I'm on the other side. So I guess outside of the trans community, I guess in the academic community, I am known for hosting a podcast called Ipsydixit, which is a podcast that interviews legal scholars on legal publications, books and articles and the like. And that's my primary claim to fame outside of the queer community, that I am like one of the Ipsydixit people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting to be on this side of the screen, to be leading the discussion because I'm always thinking, oh wait, what should I ask for the next question? I'm like, oh wait, I am the one who's talking.
Yeah, no, I totally empathize with that. How is it running your own podcast? Do you find it tiring? Is it exciting? Do you ever find it dull?
I always find it terribly exciting. I don't know if
Hmm.
it's my podcast per se. So it was a
Sure. Well,
podcast. Yeah,
yeah.
it was a podcast started by Professor Brian L. Fry
Hmm.
at the University of Kentucky College of Law. Right, and then I was brought on as the first co-host, and it was quite an experience because I'd never studied law,
Oh.
and I was like this 17, 18-year-old kid who was completely bored of class and was just chatting on Twitter. I had like 60 followers or something, which is
Hmm.
much different than the following I have now. And um, I just started talking to this law professor, and he's like, "Do you want to go and interview some law professors and some professors about the work that they're doing?" And I'm like, "Okay." And so it has always been a challenge to me because these are people who have put their entire lives into this work, right? Who have put their
Uh-huh.
lives into the study of the law, the study of society. Um, it's not always lawyers. There's sometimes different shades of academics. So these are people who have like dedicated their lives, who have gone to graduate school, who have worked at law firms and nonprofit agencies and uh, public defense firms, people who really care about their subjects, right?
Hmm.
And I have the immense privilege to be able to read their work and then talk to them about it. So I've never found it particularly dull because it's always a challenge to figure out what they're saying, first of all, and then how to talk to them and engage with them. I've taken a bit of a break from that podcast. It's been a few months since my last
Hmm.
interview. I'm in grad school myself now, so the time has been a little lesser, and I've been moving from place to place. But this is where I'm here in Texas, where I'm going to finish my graduate degree. Is where I'm going to do it and finish it. So, yeah, I always did find hosting a podcast to be quite a challenge, but quite a fascinating one and quite a privilege.
Oh yeah. Do you find that you talk to a wide variety of interviewees? Or is it all they have more similar backgrounds, all being more law focused?
Uh, I have generally focused on uh, underrepresented minorities and, in addition, just various topics that interested me at the time. Uh, you know, I think I've had people who were PhDs in non-law subjects. I couldn't name them off the top of my head. Um, but yeah, it was originally set up as, a podcast run by a law professor, so it's much more about the law and issues relating to the law.
Hmm.
So it but to say that they all have similar backgrounds is a little misleading
Hmm.
because these are some are people who come from a long line of lawyers. Some people are first generation students who worked their way up and are now professors or doing postdoctorates or the like. So I would like to think that I had the privilege to talk to a bunch of people who were doing fascinating work, who came from various walks of life. But I think that I have mostly focused on some legal scholarship. So the first interview I did, which was a co-hosting with Professor Fry, was interviewing Professor Mabel Romero of Tulane University Law School. At the time, she was at Northern Illinois, which was my alma mater. Um, so she wrote an article for the Northwestern Journal of Law and Criminology about profit-driven prosecution. So basically, cities and municipalities seeking lawyers to work on contract as prosecutors. What did this mean for the criminal justice system, and what does this mean, when the justice system is privatized like this? And I think that's incredibly important work. Professor Romero was kind enough to invite me to CrimFest, which is a gathering of criminal law scholars. So I attended CrimFest, I want to say CrimFest 2019 at Brooklyn Law School.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to meet up with a couple scholars in the criminal law. And, this is important work. I mean, it is heavily academic in certain situations, but these are people who are talking about important issues that touch upon like family law courts, upon what kids getting sent off to prisons, about people having the representation that they deserve. So, I have the privilege to host an academic podcast. I have kind of an outsider's view, having not been an academic and not currently a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I'll ever be one, but we'll see about that one. But I would like to think that outsider's view gives me the opportunity to read more into these papers and then ask the questions that people who might have a training in the law might have overlooked in the certain claims in those papers. And overall, I'm trying to get the questions and the overall prodding to get these legal scholars to talk about their work in a way that can help illuminate their piece more. And potentially, I've heard of like law professors and certain lawyers listening to this on their commute to work, which is, it's very interesting to me. Like at the time I was like an 18-year-old and just like having like prominent scholars like, oh yeah, I listened to you on my way to work and I'm really fascinated in what you guys host. And I'm just like, oh really? And it's a little bit of pressure, but I have enjoyed the ability to highlight interesting works and important works. And so Professor Romero's work on profit-driven prosecution does offer a lot of questions about the criminal justice system that I think academics are in a good place to ask and prod, and especially former practitioners of the criminal law, which has the ability to segregate, brutalize, and imprison people. And certainly, in regards to this podcast, trans people definitely do have a certain burden when interacting with that criminal justice system. And so you really do have a lot of good questions that are raised by academics, and hopefully some of those will filter their way into the ways that we interact with one another and how the government interacts with us in this country.
Yeah. You touched a little bit on the next thing I was going to ask you a little bit. So you expanded upon it a little bit already, but I was going to ask for for when you're doing your interviews, the questions that you ask, they're more geared toward, since you have more of an outsider's perspective, something that maybe the audience themselves would be asking and wanting to know the answers to. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, there are three kinds of people who might list it. Right? You have legal academics
Mm-hmm.
who either haven't read that paper or have read that paper and want to know more, or and then you have like the general public. I know that Professor Brian Fry has talked to people who weren't directly academics. I believe that he's talked to a person who is in a penitentiary right now and had him on the podcast. So I ask questions trying to interrogate what these scholars' broader purpose for writing was. Right? So like, why did you write this piece? Not only like, oh, I saw you had the cite on page 12, citation 112,
Right.
what does this one line that you wrote 10 months ago mean?
Yeah.
Not I have done that sometimes, and I feel like that isn't as productive as I'd like. It's more like,
Hmm.
why write about this? Why dedicate your life for a certain period of time to investigating these issues? And what
Hmm.
should people know about it? So, I had Joshua Fauché, who is now the dean at Creighton Law School, who was talking about the demise of director primacy and talking about what director primacy is um, should directors of corporations or should shareholders of corporations be the decision makers who are directors accountable to? What decisions should corporations make? Uh, you know,
Hmm.
these are heavily dry questions, but then they dive into questions of, for oil companies, do we make the decision to open up another oil well, and what are the environmental implications of that? For a business, it's, should we or should we not embrace certain social movements?
Hmm.
Uh, there has been, a right-wing uproar about woke corporations, and beyond the very dry issues of like, oh, who gets to decide in the presence of the corporate law, it also goes into questions of, what can corporations do, and overwhelming what is the overwhelming outlook for what the purpose of the corporation is in American society, which is, something that's still uh, being developed. So, another person I got to talk to was Duncan Hollis, who is an international law professor at Temple. He wrote a piece with Martha Finnemore, who is a professor of international relations at George Washington University, and beyond naming and shaming in cybersecurity. So it asks questions of, how will the U.S. government react to a cybersecurity attack from a another state actor or non-state actor, that, should we go to war over hacking? Should we not? What does it mean to go and call someone out for hacking our computers? Is, a cybersecurity attack worthy of the kinds of military responses that we would have seen post 2001? Uh, and so you really get to talk about a lot of fascinating issues that have very real world implications, war and peace, imprisonment, uh, what corporations do, and what their social impact should be. So I have appreciated being able to ask these questions, and I've tried to go and, narrow down beyond just the pages of a law review. And I make no expectation that anybody besides legal academics and lawyers should be cracking open the pages of a law review. If you're cracking open the pages of a law review at the ages that I was, like 16, 17, you've either got a problem or you're extremely academically gifted. And I'm not sure which one I'm yet, so.
Yeah.
um, but yes, I do try to kind of push out where these ideas came from and what the social purpose of writing, of academic scholarship should be. And, I think that's a argument left to academics about what they want their field to be, and whether they want to be like the mirror to society to go and illuminate social problems, whether they are writing it to do so, or whether they're writing it, for ostensibly objective academic purposes. And, some of these things that they write about do end up being issues that we as trans people are concerned about. So Jessica Clark at Vanderbilt, I
Hmm.
believe. I had the opportunity to interview Jessica Clark about their paper in, I believe it was the Harvard Law Journal, They, Them, and Theirs, about using the pronouns they, them, and theirs, and what is the legal and social implications of that. And, that's a question that uh, trans people are interested in, about, non-binary identities and the law, about, the social implications and the legal implications of being able to have gender markers beyond FM, being able to mark your gender as X on government forms, being able to have that legal recognition, whether it's on the state level or on the federal level by the State Department in your passport. These are questions that are heavily academic, and then they become questions that we become concerned with.
Hmm.
And, you know, academia can be many things. I think there are certainly many critiques that you can make of the academic structure. Anyone who's stepped foot in the academy, the university, can certainly make them, right? Uh, you know, the overwhelming presence of the professors having gone to elite universities. And what does it mean when the people who are educating the next generation of, whether it be legal professionals or just college educated professionals, what does it mean when most of them, an overwhelming majority of them who are going to get tenure track jobs will come from Harvard, Yale, Stanford? What does it mean when we allow elite institutions to make those choices?
Hmm.
Those are arguments that I'm not going to potentially make. I'm not going to make here. I think that they're ones that, critiques of the academy can write upon. I in my podcast, I generally do try to go and get underrepresented minorities and scholars who are not working at big name schools or publishing in the big name journals to be able to talk to me. That's one of the things I did try to aim for every time I do an interview.
Hmm.
And um, you know, I mean, if academia is an ideas industry, everyone's got ideas, right? So we should, get people to listen to some of these ideas. And if I have the opportunity to, as I've been told by certain law professionals, by certain law professors, by people who listen to this podcast, people who are, actually like respectable people who have like jobs at law firms and
Yeah.
tenured professorships, and here I am like with my little hinky dink recording microphone and some printed out law review pages. Like, I can do a little bit of my part to go and
Mm.
help illuminate some of these social issues and help bring up some of these ideas that the ideas industry is putting out that other people may have ignored because of the prestige in which these papers were published or the prestige of the authors. I've never cared about prestige. I like ideas. Um, and that's one of the great things about hosting that podcast, is that I get to hear a lot of ideas, good and
Hmm.
bad. I don't make judgments on them. I mean, these people have dedicated their lives to it, right? So
Sure.
they have a reason for making those decisions and
Right.
those things that they wrote about, for better or for worse, right? Sometimes there are like people who write like, oh, trans people shouldn't be in sport. And I don't ever interview those people because I don't feel that I would necessarily be happy about interviewing them, so
Yeah.
I don't. But there are people who write about these things, and their ideas get heard in the public forum.
Yeah.
And as a podcast host that managed to cater to a pretty specialized group of people, I do try and use that platform that I have conscientiously.
Yeah. That's fair. I mean, everybody has to kind of be responsible with it once it gets to a certain point, you know? I mean, certainly if you make a project that's just you and your friends and family and you're hanging out or whatever, fine, whatever. You can jump off your roof or whatever and try to land on a trampoline. Who cares? But like once you get to like 10, 30, 40, 50,000 followers and stuff like that, you really have to start, being a little bit more aware of the stuff you're covering and like the people you're interviewing and like their backgrounds and stuff like that, because you never know when you might, accidentally platform somebody who's like got, big white nationalist dog whistle views or something like that, who knows? But yeah, certainly important.
Yeah, there are relatively important people who have been on the podcast, who listen to the podcast. Um, I know that there is a judge in the DC circuit who has listened to the podcast, who used to work at the University of Louisville. I know that there are working professionals, and when you get to that level of people listening,
Hmm.
there is a conscious element of it. And um, it's not my podcast, so I don't make all the editorial decisions.
Sure.
Um, I have had the privilege to be able to interview some people that I'm not sure would have ever been listened to, who would have never been interviewed about their papers in other settings.
Right.
Um, but I'm not going to claim that, I'm this big, important big shot. I'm just someone who was given the privilege to use my Winky Dink microphone to go and talk to some people with interesting ideas. And um, I have appreciated the privilege to do that. And as for now, I'm taking a break from it, trying to go and focus on getting ready for my graduate classes and dealing with some health conditions I have.
Fair enough. Well, so in addition to that, did you have anything topic wise that maybe you wanted to talk about tonight?
Huh. Yeah, I've always been involved with, I guess, what can classically be called like social justice work,
Hmm.
right? So from a young age, I was helping blind children in Vietnam, delivering braille printers to blind schools in Vietnam. And, you know, I think one of the things about visibility and community, especially, online communities, is that, you can really miss the forest for the trees, right? Like we can get so involved about online drama, about streamer drama, which I will not comment about, but it's all on there, right? That you know, especially in queer communities who tend to go and consume the same content, we are all somewhat
Right.
aware of it, and it can be useful to have visibility and to have discussions. It can be useful to have those things, but I do think of the times you know, in Vietnam, bringing braille printers to kids about, when I was younger, um, I helped set up a group that would 3D print prosthesis for a community group known as the Enable Community Foundation. So we would 3D print prosthetics for people who couldn't afford it. And that's a very direct action that we took to alleviate some of the gaps in the current national and international healthcare coverage,
Hmm.
especially for prosthesis. These are things that people use every day that make their lives more accessible. You know, I'm glad that trans life, trans ideas, trans acceptance is so visible these days. But sometimes I do worry that, especially in um, these online communities, these social media communities, these artificial media communities, that people can get so caught up in the trees that they miss the forest. That what are we hoping for, right? I mean, we are hoping for. Well, I hope some people are. I hope for. Let me revise this. I hope for a better world, right? Um, you know, that's always been my ethos. It's why I got involved with trying to go and work with people who were trying to 3D print hands with the Enable Community Foundation. Uh, people who were working on 3D printed umbilical cords. It's why I spent so much time trying to go and bring educational supplies and materials to blind schools in Vietnam, which were underfunded and didn't have supplies and didn't have the support they needed. You know, we can raise awareness for a lot of things. But there's also an element of doing, right? That we all need to be aware of. That, you can talk about a lot of things. You can certainly get into the nuances of a lot of things. Certainly, I have loved, getting into the nuance of things. I mean, I studied politics as a student, and I just remember
Mhm.
reading these huge tomes of political philosophy, you know, Agamben, Marx, Sheldon Wolin, whose book I have over here on my desk. You can really get into these things, but you can also do things. You can also make the world a little bit of a better place by pushing for acceptance and pushing for improvements at the local level. And, not everybody has had the privilege and the opportunity I've had to go and live in Vietnam and help blind kids or be in the position to 3D print prosthetic hands or have had the opportunities like I did to, leave a difficult home and go to college at 16. I mean, that was a privilege, right? It was an opportunity I had. It was an education I had. It was the conditions I had and the assumptions that people made about me and the things I could do that allowed me to do those things. Not everyone has these opportunities, right? So, but everyone can do a little something, whether it is just, correcting someone when they get pronouns wrong, or whether it's, helping a newly out trans person get their bearing in the community. I just worry sometimes that we can get so caught up in the latest social media drama that we completely neglect our ability and sometimes the necessity and obligation we have to go and make this a little bit of a better place for this next generation of people, whether for me, Asian Americans, immigrants like my parents, or the next generation of newly out queer and trans people. I think that you know it's easy to be distracted. It's easy to talk about things. It's easy to say, "Oh, of course I support this," and I can give you a whole long thing about it. But sometimes we do need to go beyond just the latest streamer drama and really think about what can we do to help the people who need our help the most, the people who are newly out, the unhoused and the underfed, the people who are facing food insecurity, the people who um, live in places where they can't be themselves. One of the things about being trans is that I made the commitment to live as myself, but I am concerned both nationally and globally about people who are not given the opportunities to live full and happy lives. And that's something that we do need to be concerned about. And I find myself more concerned about it quite often because, when I see people, struggling to get to America, immigrants and refugees, I'm reminded of the fact that, my parents were willing to risk their lives to get onto boats on the open ocean and escape a war-torn nation, right? I mean, this is still happening around us. You know, there are still refugees and internally displaced persons. There are people um, who are unable to be themselves because of their societies or because of their religions or because of their families. And, you know, not everybody can fix every one of those problems, but we all can do a little something for everyone. So maybe I have the privilege to be able to say that, but we can do a little bit to help everybody. And um, it's very easy to talk about things, very easy well, I say it's very easy to talk about things. Right now, I'm just like, oh God, what do I say next, right? Because I don't normally get interviewed. So,
Right.
but I I digress. It's very easy to talk about things, but it's another thing to do them. And I think
Hmm.
um, something that we can do is just helping people up, helping people accept themselves, help people to have the
Hmm.
conditions of thriving. And I think that everyone can do a little something for that. And how they choose to do it, I can't tell them, but I think everyone can do a little something for that.
Yeah, I think for the most part, most people want to. Um, I think are, as all there will always be there are a few problematic sticks in the mud that just stand up and throw mud at everybody around them and don't contribute anything good. But we can grow as a community even despite those kinds of people because as you kind of mentioned it, the forest for the trees. If we look at the trans community as the forest, if you stand there and you look at one tree that's like glowing red and the rest of the trees are like glowing green, and you just stand there and you look at the glowing red tree and you're like, this is a bad tree. This is a really bad tree. This is such a bad tree. Like, and then you don't zoom out and you see like all of the other glowing green trees. Like that can be a problem. And I think people focus too much on the bad and can lose sight of the good. So.
Yeah. So I guess my final thing I want to talk about is like doing good, right? Like I am obsessed with doing good. I have tried to go and make a better conditions for my friends and for uh, the issues I've really cared about. One of the issue I've cared about quite often, are the education and opportunities given to the underprivileged around the world. And one of the opportunities that I had was to go and try to address that, especially with blind children in Vietnam.
Yeah. Do you want
But
to maybe expand a little bit more on your time with them?
yeah, well, one of the things that made me really passionate about the work of social justice, right? And I don't mean like making long posts on Tumblr, but actually doing the work was I was living in Vietnam and we went to visit these blind schools,
Hmm.
and you know we went to this one place, you know a long ride from Ho Chi Minh City,
Hmm.
and it was in a rice field. It was like an industrial style building with multiple floors, and we went inside. They had this fully decked out computer lab that had been donated by some American company, some charitable group.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Not going to name names here. Just
Sure.
imagine like some big charity plus some big company, right?
Uh-huh.
And we walk in. It is the warmest place ever. There are fans in the walls that aren't even running, and these mosquitoes are just flying everywhere. And we asked, the volunteers at the school and the people who run the school, why aren't these fans running and helping keep the place cool and make this a little easier for the kids here?
Hmm.
And the reason is because they didn't have electricity. They didn't have the funds to electricity. So, you can do good in big and prominent ways. Like these charitable groups had delivered, this computer lab for blind kids, all these accessories, all these tools that could help them learn.
Uh-huh.
And they never even thought, hey, um, let's go and create the foundation for this.
Hmm.
go and see, what they need first. No, it was just a
Right.
donation without context. So, something that we would do is that we would go to the schools, we talk to the people who run them, we talk to people who volunteered for them, we
Hmm.
talk to people with knowledge in that community about how to get things done. And we try to address what they needed first instead of, just giving them things. We wanted to work with them. We didn't want to go and tell them this is what you need to do and we can tell you to do it because we have money. Right? It's
Yeah.
like we want to go and see what the local needs are, I
Hmm.
think.
Yeah.
So, my experience with that. And believe me, I don't want to give off the impression that Vietnam is like this place without electricity. No, it's a rapidly developing country
Yeah.
with huge cities and public transportation networks that are much better than many American cities. Don't get
Yeah.
me wrong.
Yeah.
Like, um, it's not like Vietnam is just this desperately poor country with flies flying around everybody like you see in the arms of the angels ahead.
Right.
It is a relatively advanced place, but um, there are people doing good work there. There are people who have dedicated their lives to it, and there are people who we do need to pay attention to uh, when they ask for help, when they ask for support. And so, in the work of doing and acting for the social good, for social justice, with all the negatives and positives that come with that term.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why social justice can have such a negative terminology is because, you can have people who write prescriptions without understanding the context.
Hmm.
Uh, Particularly people who live and have wealth, usually in the industrialized societies of the West, to go and tell other people how to do things. You can have a lot of problems. Um, the anthropologist Elizabeth Cullen Dunn once wrote about the conditions in a refugee town in Georgia during the Russo-Georgian War, post-Russo-Georgian War, and how the aid groups there had taken the had taken this formula that they had used for aid in countries without running water, countries in the global south, and they had tried to apply it to Georgia. They'd given them like huge uh, boxes of food and water treatment things, but they had completely ignored what the actual needs were. And uh, Dunn's words for that were adhocracy, right? Uh, Bureaucracy plus advocacy is adhocracy. Um, Something I'm very passionate about is trying to prevent in the things that I'm involved in adhocracy. Like, if you get involved with an organization, you're probably not running it in the beginning. And if you get into the position to run it, you probably aren't listening to me. But, what people should be aware of is that, in the positions where you have the ability to make a difference, you should focus on what is needed, not what you think is needed, not what you've read about, not what some textbook in international aid will tell you about, or what some textbook on helping the poor or something, but actual measurable steps that people in those local communities want and desire. I think it's very easy for all of us to go and say, oh, we could just do this and that. We could adopt X ideology. We can do this plan. We can if everyone just listened to me, the world would just work great, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like we've all thought that from time to time, like, oh, if I had just
Right.
the magic wand to fix everything, people would be not transphobic. They would, never desire or hunger ever again.
Yeah.
They would have a roof over their heads and bread on the table. We don't live in that world where, you can wave that magic wand.
Hmm.
You know, you can make arguments about whether you want it or not, but ultimately, what I think all of us should do is the vital work of listening, the vital work of listening to people and helping them achieve what they want. And, you know, it can be easy to place your own desires onto someone else and then act as if you're trying to help someone else when you're really trying to just do something for yourself. And, I'm not an aid expert. Um, I did a minimal thing, which was try and help out some blind schools in Vietnam, listen to what they wanted,
Hmm.
and guide it to them. If that meant that we bought cakes for the kids, we bought cakes for kids. If that meant that they wanted a way to make Braille when the Braille printers didn't work, and when, making Braille by hand would be too slow, we would deliver Braille typewriters. If that meant talking to people who could get the lights on, that meant talking to people who could get the lights on, right?
Hmm.
That that doesn't require it doesn't require experts. What it requires is work. What it requires is listening to people. And
Yeah.
so, um, it would be unfair of me to go up here and say, "Oh, everyone's doing it wrong," and if you just listen to me. No, don't listen to me. Listen to the people who are experienced in these realms. Listen to the people who want to help, and listen to people who are already helping. Listen to them about what they need, about what support they need, and
Hmm.
how we're going to get there. And so, I think that despite everything that's happened in this world, despite all the negativity, a better world is possible. But it can be very easy to retreat to arguing about ideologies, to arguing about, oh, I like this person saying that we should do this and everyone else is wrong. No, we should actively think about the ways that we want to be in our communities and the ways that we want to help others in our community. And we should do so conscientiously and in the ways that are helpful and not with good intentions but bad results.
Hmm.
So, to sum this all up, right? I have had the privilege in my life get to a position where my trans identity is routine, get to a position where I was able to help blind children in Vietnam, where I was able to work on projects for 3D printing, prosthetic hands, and the like, to get an education. Every moment of that has been because I had the privilege, the opportunity, and the ability to listen to other people. And maybe with trans identities, maybe with social integration, maybe with people trying to relate themselves to the world. All we can do as people, queer and non-queer, people who live in the global north and the global south, one of the best things we can do is listen. So uh, maybe we should all recognize the limits of what we can do and the radical possibilities of what we can all do if we listen to others.
Yeah, I totally agree 100%. Well, I do think I thank you for the privilege of allowing me to listen to you. Your perspective is unique and very deep and educated, and you offer a great deal of perspective. So I thank you for sharing it with us here tonight.
Yeah, and I thank you for the opportunity to be able to be on this side of the screen and be able to go and talk. Uh, I definitely don't have all these thoughts in one like coherent package. You definitely heard me a lot and like really started to like, okay, what was I saying there again? You know, it it can be difficult on this side of the screen. So if anyone else decides to come on your podcast, I recommend that they do think about it. um, I have enjoyed myself. I have had I wrote a few notes beforehand. I quickly got off of them. So
Yeah.
I have appreciated talking to you, and this has been a delight and a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you had a good time. I think we can just go ahead and wrap up here. I do want to thank you all for coming out to Friendly Friday. Go ahead and click that link in the description down there to see the Twitter account for Ellie here. And as always, take care and stay unique, everybody. Bye bye.